he accidentally dropped his backpack into the river. He was frantic and, without hesitation, plunged into the rushing, cold water. The backpack drifted down the river, carrying with it something that was worth saving at any cost. Desperately, he swam toward it, pulled it to his chest, and let the current carry him, only managing to grab a branch along the shore to finally be saved. At over 60, he could no longer endure such risks. Yet what could have driven him to walk over 500 miles, and what precious item in his backpack was worth such devotion? The story begins with a phone call from France, over 4,000 miles away. The police have notified that his son Daniel died in an accident. For Tom, hearing of his son's death was a thunderclap from a clear sky. On the train to France, Tom thought back to his son, once so full of life. He had given up his doctorate to travel the world, believing his father should accompany him. Tom had told him that few could do what he had done, throwing everything aside. But he had chosen his own life, even if it meant nothing to his son. But his son had replied, "You haven't chosen life, you've just been living." Most parents, like Tom, struggle to understand their children's choices, and Tom could never grasp the meaning of those words. After getting off the train, Tom was out of place in his suit, while everyone else was dressed for travel. The local gendarme, his contact, took him to the station. The pain of burying a child was unimaginable, and stepping into the morgue required even greater courage. Tom's eyes avoided looking directly, unable to accept the reality until he saw his son lying there. The overwhelming grief and helplessness burst forth uncontrollably. He was alone now, with no one left. From the gendarme, Tom learned that this was the Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage route. Everyone who began the journey here received a pilgrim's passport, and along the nearly 500 miles, their passport would be stamped at significant checkpoints. The gendarme told Tom he could arrange for his son's cremation to make it easier to take him home, but Tom said nothing. Outside, he tried to calm himself. A Dutchman named Joost sat down across from him and began to speak of his own pilgrimage, explaining that he was walking to lose weight, and also mentioned that someone had just died on the path, the exactly Tom's son. That night, Tom sifted through his son's belongings and photos, and finally, he couldn't hold back his tears. He knocked on the gendarme's door, eager to arrange his son's cremation. Daniel was then reduced to a small box, and Tom decided to carry his son's belongings to complete the journey his son could not. Before leaving the town, the gendarme gave him a stone, feeling a deep sympathy for Tom's loss as he, too, had lost a child. He wished Tom well, and the two parted ways. Blundering along, Tom accidentally went off course again. Would he be able to complete the pilgrimage? We would have to wait and see. Following the signs, Tom officially embarked on the pilgrimage, overwhelmed by the stunning scenery, until he passed a signpost and stopped, seeing a cross by the roadside. In that moment, he imagined his son's presence here, this being his final resting place. He took out his son's ashes and scattered them, choosing to complete the journey in this way. As he gently patted the stone, it seemed like a tender caress for his son. The vast mountain range ahead gave him a small sense of comfort. Here, under the setting sun, Tom did not move until the night had fallen. In the dark, he arrived at the Spanish border and found a small village with a large communal hostel, where nearly 100 people shared the space. A bed was only 15 euros, though it was too late for food. Having grown accustomed to a clean, comfortable home, Tom found it difficult to sleep, especially with the constant coughing, farting, and snoring noises around him. The final straw was the sound of a plastic bag being torn open. Fate, it seems, had brought Joost back into his life. He shared some food with Tom, and to Tom's surprise, he also had sleeping pills and earplugs, helping Tom sleep soundly that night. In the morning, Tom received his second stamp and asked the woman who stamped his passport if she had walked the Camino. She replied, "When I was young, I was too busy. Now that I'm old, I'm too tired." With 400 miles left to the destination, Joost became Tom's companion. Tom did not slack off, but Joost always stopped to savor the food along the way. Tom wanted to move faster, secretly scattering his son's ashes at various landmarks. Joost soon noticed, and when he learned the ashes were Tom's son's, he understood Tom's purpose. He was filled with respect for Tom. At the next stop, Tom rested, while Joost moved on to the next station, where there was delicious bacon awaiting him. Once again, their paths diverged. People come and go in life, but different goals lead them on different journeys. That night, Tom was resting outside when a woman sat down next to him. Tom greeted her, but the woman began to comment because Tom was born in the baby boomer era and she called him a boomer. He is said to have the annoying features of that generation, a ponytail and an iPod filled with James Taylor music. Tom, though fond of James Taylor, didn't have an iPod, neither a ponytail. And her assumptions about him only grew as she concluded that he must not have a phone or a computer. When Tom pointed out her anger, she replied, "Yeah, sure. I'm angry." She went on to explain that her purpose on the journey was to quit smoking, and when she reached the end, she would have succeeded. Tom, having walked in 2 days what had taken her 10, told her that if she continued at that pace, her journey would take a year. She agreed, but when she tried to say more, she realized Tom had already walked away. In truth, Sarah wasn't mocking Tom, but rather her own unsatisfactory life. The next morning, Tom saw the host of the manor trying to tease a bull with a tablecloth. The man mimicked the bullfighter's movements, basking in imagined admiration. He told Tom that he had once wanted to be a bullfighter, but his father wanted him to be a lawyer, yet he had failed at both. Tom went downstairs to grab coffee, only to find that Sarah had been ready to leave. He wished her well on her journey and success with quitting smoking. Tom jokingly said, "I actually have a phone," and Sarah replied, "I do too, and an iPod." Sarah apologized for her remarks the night before, explaining that she was trying to escape her current life. Tom had reminded her of the painful reality she was trying to avoid. "You're right," she said. "Even though you look like James Taylor." Ironically, she was listening to James Taylor on her headphones. With that, she began to embrace the purpose of the journey. Tom, now rested, continued his walk too. After some time, Tom took a break on a bridge, unpacking his bag to stretch, but he accidentally dropped it into the river. Fortunately, he could swim and managed to retrieve his son's belongings. Maybe it was the thrill of the moment that left him unsatisfied. Using his son's gear, Tom rested for the night. The next day, he joined a larger group of pilgrims and arrived at a city where he once again encountered Joost. Despite their different purposes, the path would lead them to meet again. As they walked along together, Tom eventually encountered Sarah again, and their two-person journey became a trio. Tom always walked ahead, leaving his son's ashes at significant landmarks along the way. Occasionally, they met people on the road, including a priest who gave Tom a set of rosary beads. Initially, Tom refused them, thinking they were too precious, until the priest explained that there were many lost souls among the pilgrims on this road, and pulled out other sets of beads. The trio continued, with the rhythm of the journey becoming more profound and the group slowly growing. They came across a man who was frantically throwing a stick into the air, nearly hitting Joost and Sarah. The man apologized profusely and explained he was a writer who had lost his inspiration and was trying to find it along the Camino. And so, they became four. This didn't change Tom's journey much. Joost and the writer discussed Tom's purpose, and the writer saw a potential story. Sarah was the only one who didn't know the real reason Tom was walking. As they passed through a small village, they arrived at a stop with a 5-star rating, where the owner was delighted to see pilgrims and eagerly asked everyone to show their passports so he could stamp them. Tom, however, overheard strange noises from upstairs. He took the group to investigate and discovered the owner was playing multiple roles in a rather erratic manner. The situation felt odd and unsettling, a reflection of a disturbed mind. So, the four pilgrims left without saying goodbye. Since the next stop was 4 hours away, they camped for the night. The following morning, when Tom woke up, he found that the others had disappeared. As he packed up to leave, Sarah returned, and she wondered the reason why Tom was walking. Tom was startled when his son's urn fell from his bag. Sarah tried to help, but in the heat of the moment, Tom grabbed her wrist, and she instinctively punched him. Dazed, Tom realized that Sarah's journey might not have been as simple as quitting smoking. Thankfully, the urn was undamaged, and Joost and the writer soon arrived with breakfast. Despite planning to go solo, Tom ended up continuing with the group. He intentionally slowed his pace to accommodate Sarah, who, in turn, confided in him about her abusive past. She explained how, pregnant, she had decided to terminate the pregnancy to protect herself from further violence. The punch was a result of trauma and emotional distress. She said, "Sometimes I hear her voice, and it sounds crazy because she never got to take her first breath. I imagine what she would have sounded like, and sometimes I hear her talk. I'm really sorry about your son." Tom, moved by her vulnerability, responded, "Sorry about your baby. My son was almost 40. With that, the misunderstanding was cleared, and they both understood each other a little better. At the next stop, Tom had a few drinks and, for the first time, unleashed his frustrations. He criticized the writer, calling him a boring, self-centered man, questioning how he paid for the drinks, and mocking him for living off credit cards. Just was also caught in the crossfire. He then turned to Sarah, asking her so what about Boomer, and let out all his pent-up anger. This emotional release, though chaotic, was cathartic. Afterward, Tom packed up Just's bag and tried to leave the group, but the police arrested him for disorderly conduct. When Tom woke up in the holding cell, he saw his son again. He found himself slowly coming to terms with his grief. The writer had paid his bail, and Tom thanked him, but the writer joked, "You should thank my credit card." The group set out again, and Tom promised to repay the writer, though the writer insisted, "As long as you let me use your story in my book, we're square." Tom was reluctant but eventually gave in, as the writer said he could write it anyway. Just change the names. The writer was curious about Tom's son, so Tom began to share more about the son he hadn't fully understood. As he spoke, the writer eagerly wrote it all down, and Just was pleased to see Tom finally open up. The group reached Burgos, where Tom's backpack was stolen by a child. The group chased the thief into an alley, where Just warned Tom not to press the matter further since the area was known to be run by gypsies, and no one would intervene. Tom, however, was only concerned about getting his son's ashes back. Eventually, Just persuaded the group to leave, but a truck driver witnessed the incident. Tom had been ready to give up the pilgrimage, but the driver returned with a stolen bag. It turned out that the child was the driver's son, and he scolded the boy for bringing shame to the gypsies. In an effort to clear the family's name, the driver invited Tom to dinner with the gypsies. During the gathering, the driver suggested that Tom should take his son's ashes to a temple in Murcia, not seeing the Camino as the end but as a part of the journey. Tom, confused by the driver's insistence, couldn't understand why he had to do this, but agreed to continue. With their spirits lifted, the group set out once more. On the road, new and interesting things always awaited them. Along the way, each person found healing, and the knots in their hearts were gradually untied. It wasn't until the last 200 miles that Tom suddenly suggested they spend a night at a state-run historic castle hotel, with all expenses covered by him. And so, they checked into the luxurious hotel. As Just looked at his growing belly in the mirror, he remembered the initial purpose of walking. Faced with the sumptuous array of dishes sent by the hotel, he took one bite and then set it aside. That night, a knock echoed at Tom's door. A sleepless Sarah let herself in and plopped down on the sofa. Not long after, another knock came. This time, it was Just, who brought along a bottle of fine wine. Just as they were about to toast, yet another knock sounded. Without a second thought, they knew it was the writer, who couldn't sleep either. It seemed as if they had all silently agreed. Together, they squeezed onto the sofa, though they had wasted 3 other rooms. But no matter how big the rooms were, they couldn't compare to the warmth and laughter of a cramped little room filled with friendship and joy. The next day, the group resumed their pilgrimage, and after an indeterminate walk, they arrived before a pile of stones. Sarah produced a stone. It turned out that the stone the gendarme had given Tom before his departure was meant for this very spot, a testament to the hardships endured along the way. Tom didn't try to avoid scattering his son's ashes anymore, and his companions offered him warm, heartfelt encouragement. With the pilgrimage nearing its end, Tom intended to visit the temple mentioned by the truck driver. The others, however, were preparing to return to their own lives, and so they reached the end of the pilgrimage. Santiago Cathedral stood in solemn grandeur. Before the portal of glory, Sarah set down her cigarette pouch and, as if unburdened at last, stepped into the church. Here, people shed the burdens they had carried all along the way, while only Just, following the prescribed instructions, knelt on both knees and approached the statue to offer his devout reverence. Inside, incense burners were lit and a moving ceremony commenced. Several acolytes swung the incense burner on a rope, and as the flames burned, the fragrance grew ever more intense until it filled the entire cathedral. It was as though the aroma swept away all sins and purified even the most clouded souls. At last, Tom had brought his son to his final destination. The group stamped the last seal at that sacred spot, and soon after, the staff issued Tom a certificate for completing the journey. When he saw the name on it, Tom suddenly declared that it was wrong and changed it to his son's name. In this way, everything came full circle, and Tom fulfilled his original purpose. However, after it was all over, Tom did not attain the redemption he had expected. It seemed that everyone felt something was missing, leaving an emptiness behind. that was until Tom smiled knowingly. Then the writer understood, Sarah understood, and even Joost came to his realization, albeit a bit late. Without further words, the four set out once again, accompanying Tom to the final stop the gypsies had mentioned, Mercia. Facing the vast sea, they watched as surging waves and splashing spray unfolded before them. The writer couldn't help but sigh, thinking that perhaps writing is much like this scene. Sometimes, no words are needed at all. Sarah lit another cigarette and remarked, this was never about quitting these things. Joost, too, let go of his worries about his weight. If his suit no longer fit, he would simply buy a new one, and if his wife preferred to keep her distance, well, there was nothing he could do. In the end, only Tom remained. Throughout the journey, he had finally come to terms with his past, realizing that only by letting go and embracing acceptance could redemption be achieved. He made his way to the seashore and left every last trace of his son's ashes behind. Thus, the pilgrimage came to an end, and his own personal journey was only just beginning. In the end, we realize that change often comes after a shock to the system. Tom, at 60, took up the pilgrimage with his son's ashes, trying to understand what his son had sought on this path. By the end of the journey, he had found clarity. How many of us, like the woman at the first stop, are too busy when we're young and too tired when we're old? How many of us, like the bullfighter, sacrifice our own dreams to satisfy others? The Camino teaches us that the journey isn't about the destination, but the inner transformation along the way. We are all on our own pilgrimage, and as long as we are willing to set off, it's never too late to seek the path that will lead us to self-discovery.